Our first reading this morning is from 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 3 through 14. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, only he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall rise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life."
Our gospel reading for today comes from the book of John, chapter 6. Now, we've been in the last couple of weeks in the Old Testament and Ephesians, and then before that, we've been the feeding of the 5,000. In the meantime, in the gospel readings, we have stayed roughly in the same place. It is now 4 weeks later, but we are still in the same chapter and still talking about the same things. That is, the chapter begins with the feeding of the 5,000, and we're still in the sort of repercussions of that particular miracle, that particular sign in the book of John. And this part is precipitated by a question from the crowd about manna. Manna is a key part of this conversation. So I invite you to listen now to the word of God to you in John chapter 6, verses 51 through 58. "I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." The Jews then disputed among themselves, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" So Jesus said to him, "Very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, for I will raise them up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate and they died, but the one who eats this bread will live forever." This is the word of the Lord. A few weeks ago, I read a great sermon preached at Nassau Presbyterian Church up in Princeton. It's called "When the Manna Stops." Reverend Davis spoke of the moment that the manna stopped for the people in the wilderness. That is, the moment that they passed into the promised land. There was no longer manna for them. There was a change there. There were no longer dependent on God in that they were picking up God's bread each and every morning, but now they had to put their in God's bounty. Now, the way that they experience the abundance of God is not just scooping it up in the mornings, but working the land of milk and honey that they had been promised. It's a change, right? And it's a big change. We assume that the other things, the other miracles that were happening in the time when people were in the wilderness, like the quail that would come by and the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that were there in front of them each and every day, also stopped. And all this happened kind of suddenly, right? You know, one day they were on one side of the Jordan, and the other day they were on the other side of the Jordan, and all of a sudden they're expected to fend for themselves. It's a different way of looking at things, right? They woke up each and every morning walking among the miracles of God when they were in the wilderness. Everywhere they looked, there was some supernatural evidence that God was with them. But now, instead of waking up and seeing God every day, now they have to look for ways to see God in their everyday experience. It's a big change. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever had the experience of sort of coming down from the mountaintop? Maybe you were on a mission trip and you woke up each and every morning with prayer and praise for Jesus. Every night you went to bed with time for Thanksgiving, and you spent all day transforming people's lives with other Christians that strengthened you, that supported you, changing the world, and you felt good. And then you came home, and that Monday morning you had an 8 a.m. meeting that was a waste of everyone's time. And that whole dream of waking up with Jesus at peace every morning ran into the brick wall of reality. That kind of thing can happen to us coming down from any sort of thing. Maybe you were at a youth conference, like on Tree, you had an incredible spiritual experience, and then you went back, and everybody kind of looked at you as if you were the same person that you were 2 weeks before. And sure enough, in 3 or 4 weeks, you were that person, because it's so hard to be transformed in a world that still expects you to be who you used to be. We can have that experience coming down from a truly powerful spiritual conversation with somebody in which everything feels good and right. We have that experience coming down from any number of things. But the question is, how do we live when the blessing, the abundance, the presence of God is no longer obvious? How do we know that we're nourished in those moments? The gospel reading for today is a conversation about manna. What's happened is Jesus has fed the 5,000 and then he disappears. The disciples go off the boat. They see, this is where John places Jesus walking on the water. It's right in sort of the middle of this thing. The disciples go on the boat without Jesus. Jesus walks over to meet them, and the crowd is like, we know you're going to get on the boat. Where is he? And they go and they find him eventually in Capernaum. And he says, look, you followed me because I gave you bread. But that's not the point. What I bring is the bread of life. What I bring is bread from heaven. And they think manna. The people are following him because he's fed their physical needs. And Jesus tells them about the bread that leads to eternal life. This happens a lot in the book of John. John loves to do this thing where Jesus says something, and somebody takes it absolutely literally, and they don't understand it. Jesus is like, no, you don't get it. It's like sort of a reverse Amelia Bedelia. So Jesus tells Nicodemus, you've got to be born again. And Nicodemus is like, well, how am I supposed to get back into my mother's womb? Jesus tells the woman at the well, follow me and you'll never be thirsty again. I'll give you water, then you'll never be thirsty again. And she's like, oh, phew, that will save me so many trips to the well. and here, Jesus says, I will give you the bread that leads to eternal life. And they're like, yes, great, bread. But that's not really what Jesus is talking about. Because Jesus says, I am the bread. And all of a sudden they're stuck. And I gotta admit, I'm kind of stuck with it, right? When Jesus says, I am bread, I kind of want to pull him aside, like Peter did, right? Pull Jesus aside and be like, Jesus, no. You is maybe trying to pull us beyond the first level of understanding, beyond the literal level of understanding, and into another understanding. That is, manna was not just bread. For the people traveling through the wilderness, it was also this sign of God's presence, this sign of God's nourishment. And at the time, they understood that the law was the new manna. That is, they would say that Torah is our manna. It is our sign of God's nourishment. And what Jesus says is this is not enough. What you need is what comes from God. And they say, well, what comes from God? And he says, meat. So you should eat meat. That is, you need to be nourished by me. Your spiritual fulfillment is found in Jesus Christ. Jesus is talking about, what do you do when the manna stops? When you don't feel #blessed anymore. When you finally dig yourself out of a hole and you're finally on solid ground for like a second and then everything crashes down under you again. What do you do when you no longer know? When you're no longer making progress, when you're no longer feeling good, when you had a great sort of set of spiritual practices that worked really, really well for you, and then something happens and it throws everything out of whack and you don't know what to do. He's talking about who you can rely on when the manna stops. What he's saying is that the law cannot sustain you. If we reduce the gospel to a set of do's and don'ts, that's never going to get us the sustenance that we need. They can point us to how we should live a good life. They can describe what a good life ought to look like. But in the end, it's a pretty thin diet to try to treat the gospel like a rule book, like a set of yeses and nos, a set of behaviors that we have to live within or without. Social justice cannot sustain us. If we reduce the gospel to a set of policy goals, we're gonna fall apart because we are who we are. We're gonna twist those into something that is beautiful but doesn't require us to change in any way at all. Or we're gonna twist them into something that requires nothing of ourselves. Or we're gonna try and then we're gonna be disheartened when they fail. Social justice is not enough to sustain us in the gospel, to keep us nourished. Belief can't sustain us either. It's not, we can know all of the right doctrines. We can know the difference between transubstantiation and consubstantiation and justification and transmogrification and all of those things, but they won't get us there. It doesn't matter necessarily that we believe all the right things, or it does, because belief can help point us to Jesus, can help point us to where the sustenance really is, but it alone is not going to get us there. And so when the people ask, like, what about this manna? And Jesus says, me, they're really asking, what is it that is going to sustain us? What is going to be the sign that is God's presence for us? How will we know? Where is our pillar of cloud? Where is our pillar of fire? Where is the manna? Where is our daily bread? And Jesus says, it is me. What Jesus offers, what the life, death, and resurrection that Jesus reveals, is the grace of God. And that's crucial. Because all of these other things are good things, right? If we believe the right things, we have a better sense of how we ought to act and do and relate to each other. If we put our efforts into redeeming the world that is around us, then we live in the community of God. We build up the kingdom of God. If we understand how the Bible teaches us how to behave, that is great, because it helps us live a full life, a life in which we love our neighbor and love our God with all our hearts, with all our minds, and with all ourselves. But none of these have anything to offer us when we fail. And we always fall short. If heaven is here and we start here, we can take steps, but we never make it all the way on our own. What Jesus is, what Jesus reveals, is bridging the gap. It is God coming down to us. Jesus died the most godless death that you can die. He was alone, he was abandoned, he was ridiculed. He cried out, "Where are you, God?" He knew God not in that moment. And yet, God resurrected him. God brought him back to life. God showed that forsakenness, that abandonedness is not the end, that God will bridge the gap for us, that God's love is greater than all of our failures. Jesus went through hell so that we would know, no matter what sort of hell that we go through, that we are in right now, that we endure, that Jesus has conquered. That God will love us through, beyond, and over anything that we've put us through. When the manna stops, what we really need is grace. It's not any of these other things which are all wonderful. It is the cross, it is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that you are beloved, that you are treasured, that you are known and understood and cared for in everything that you do. What Jesus offers instead of bread is himself. He offers this grace of God. The question for us remains, at least a little bit, right? It is, where do we find that love? And this place is maybe the best place. I say sometimes that the best thing that we can do on Sunday is show up to church so that God knows where to find us. But the reverse is true for us, so that we know where to find the love of God. Because here is a community of people that are committed to offering each other grace. Here, we come to this table and we receive the bread of life that sustains us, because it is a sign of God's grace. When we take the body and the blood, the flesh and the blood of Christ, we remember the sacrifice that was made for us, and we are united with Christ in the cross and in the resurrection from the cross. In both of these things, it is not necessarily that these are the only places where we can find the bread of life, but these are the places where we can reliably trust that there will be sustenance for us, there will be nourishment for us. It is in the Word of God. The Word of God that sustains us. When we read the Bible, when we hear the story of God's love, we get that nourishment, that spiritual nourishment that we need. We are reminded that no matter what happened throughout the whole gospel, throughout the whole Old Testament, that God never gave up on God's people, and that God will never give up on us. The truth is that Jesus is the bread of life, and it is manifest in our daily bread, in the little things that nourish us, the little prayers that someone says for us, the little prayers that we say for somebody else, the way we come together and try, we're not perfect, but try to treat each other with grace and love in everything that we do, and the way that we come here and receive this one little piece of bread that reminds us, that proclaims to us, that is for us sustenance in the holy and blessed promise of God. That is that God will be our God and we will be God's people forevermore, no matter what, to the ends of the earth, even to the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.